last week we talked about permission to be. This week we're talking about freedom to be, and I'm realizing the more we talk about this, that it's really it's like this duo of like, once we give ourselves the permission, the freedom that we then experience, right? Like you don't really have one without the other. I mean, I suppose you could give yourself permission and then not do it.
It's like the cause and effect.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But like, we're not having the freedom without giving ourselves the permission. And what an interesting kind of filter to look back at things with, like to look back at life on, through this filter of like, oh yeah, I did have to give myself permission. And then I had this freedom, the freedom of such and such experience. What stuck out for me, I know I said this in my segment, but I don't think it even landed as strongly as it did until after I said it, with this idea of like, gave myself the permission. It's okay to be this thing. It's okay to be the minister, right? It's okay to be a minister. And there's probably something in all of our lives for this. Like, it's okay to be whatever the thing you're being called to be. And then once you do that, like the resistance we had to being that thing is there's an exact like direct parallel and connection between the resistance and what the thing is, right? So like, I had no idea, however many years ago that was, sitting in the office behind the desk, like, oh, you're talking about being a minister, right? Yeah, no way. So weird. Like, I mean, I don't think it had ever crossed my mind until that point. Like, oh, that's the thing. That's what I've always been to some degree. I've always played that role. Why is it such a weird thing? And I, have realized, I mean, it's taken several years to kind of work through enough to even see it. But like, the resistance was, wow, it's really comforting, or it feels safe to not have to claim being that thing. Because then I can just kind of I don't really have to take responsibility for being that thing. Like, there's a safety in, I can do those things. I can do most of those things, but I don't really have to like claim actually being that thing. I don't have to step all the way out on the end of the branch and actually like announce to the world, I'm going to be this thing. Right. And so I think there's a safety in our, in our strategies and our stories and our coping mechanisms for life that seem really real. I think they can seem really in my mind, I had convinced myself, to whatever degree I was aware of it, that was a really safe perspective on life. That was a really that was working. I don't actually have to go out and do the whole thing, because I can still get to do pieces of it, and that's fine. Right. And then finally realizing like, oh no, like I don't actually get to be me unless I do the whole thing, unless I actually embrace, naming like, yes, I'm going to be a minister. I'm going to go do that. That's really who I am. So now I just have to like, can I say it? Can I actually say that's what I, but I think when we claim it, when we name it, when we really embrace that freedom, then it opens up like this whole other world of experience that doesn't exist to us, or isn't possible for us. If, it wasn't possible for me when I was kind of leaning into that story, that mechanism, that ego thing that was like, no, it's fine. Just play small. You're okay.
Well, and also to another point too, like, stepping into like being a minister, just to use your example. Well, that doesn't have to look a certain way. And so then oftentimes we step into the thing, freedom to be, where we stepped into another expectation.
Yeah, right.
The minister looks like this. The minister does this. We do all these things. And clearly we're not necessarily doing this in a way that someone would watch it and say, oh, look, they're ministers. Yay, look at them.
Right.
Because, so I think that this underlying thing that is under this kind of conversation of freedom to be is that we get to set our own parameters. We get to set what that looks like for us. And yeah, if you want to name it, if you want to say minister or whatever you want to say, that's great. But like, we get to determine collectively, well, and you and I too, but get to determine what that looks like. And so I think for me, that is like terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, because I think we are conditioned to like I'm always been a rule follower. It looks like this. I want to know what's expected of me, when to show up, what's going to happen, and what I'm supposed to do afterwards. It's very comfortable. But then it's not very expansive sometimes, because then I'm not open to anything else that may show up that's like, oh wow, yeah, that's great too. And so I think for me, freedom to be really is cracking cracking like chipping away at the expectations, and like where am I living from those expectations. And sometimes we think, oh well, I'm just expecting this of myself. Well yeah, but we're like the buttons were like plugged into us a long time ago, what that actually looks like. And so beginning to like really deconstruct
Mm.
those things in our lives that have kept us playing small, or kept us playing within the parameters of other people's expectations, and then beginning free to be. Now, this doesn't mean I'm free to be like an asshole to people. This is not what this is
Right.
meaning. Freedom to be. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean they're talking about freedom to be. I can just go to
Be whatever I want.
no, rein it in a little bit, of course, but it's really beginning to look at those places, and I've done that. Even stepping into this experience, like, I don't know, sometimes you feel like you're playing minister. We're playing minister, it has that feeling, because I think sometimes when we do step and do something new, it kind of feels like we're playing it a little bit
Mm.
until we kind of get our groove, and that's okay too, right? That
Yeah.
this exploration, that new. It's trying things and saying, "Oh, that didn't work." Right? And then being able to, like, regroup.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for me, it just relieves, I feel like I can take a deep breath with this kind of freedom to be,
Yeah. Yeah.
just the impact of expectations, and I can let myself off the hook too, and I can rest when I need to, say no when I need to, say yes when I want to,
Yeah.
all those things, and that's very freeing.
That's an interesting take on this story that I told, because I wouldn't have been able to make being a minister my own thing if I hadn't first been like, okay, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm going to become that. I am
Mhm.
that. Giving myself permission all over again
Yeah.
to be that thing. Without having done that, I don't think I would have been able to make it my own. I don't think I would have been able to be part of us doing it differently, right? I think I would have been without. I probably could have gone through all the motions and never given myself permission, and I would probably be trying to be that old version of what a minister was in my mind. Like, I'm sure I'd be up there and looking like, you know, the minister I grew up with at 8 years
Your
old.
three-piece suit. You got your
Yeah,
three-piece suit on, you slick back
right.
hair, yeah.
With a Bible or something, like a very specific thing. But having given myself the permission, because like we said, I think it has to be both. Like, I gave myself the
Yeah.
permission, then there was this freedom to be like, oh, okay, I can be that thing. That's okay. It's not what I thought it would be. It can be this other thing. Okay, I'll give myself permission to be a new version of that and claim it and name it. And now all of a sudden there is like
Yeah.
this room for it to be this very unique me version of what that could even be, which looks nothing, nothing at all
No
like
three-piece
I could
suit.
have ever imagined. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how comparison kind of swirls in between these 2 things, with permission to be and freedom to be, this,
Yeah.
comparison, and I think we're conditioned to do that, right? To look over there and say, "Oh, what are they doing?" Kinda like when you're, taking, like, a yoga class and you're doing, like, a new yoga pose, or maybe this is just my story, and I'm like, "I'm not really sure how to do that," so I'm kinda looking at other people to figure out how I'm supposed to do that, you know? Um, but I think, like, that becomes, like, a barrier sometimes, even in the permission to be and freedom to be, is this comparison, thing that kinda keeps us stuck too.
Yeah.
Becomes a barrier when we're comparing ourselves to others. And it's interesting though, then we become, we're not living our life, we're living someone else's life, or someone else's expectation of our life.
So there's an interesting thing happening in the chat at the moment that I think we can touch on, because I this thought, if I'm understanding what's being said in the chat, this thought has crossed my mind a bit. This idea that or the connection between like freedom and politics, freedom and the United States, like for like the pursuit of,
Yes.
and freedom becomes this like once I make enough money, I'll be free from blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. And also then there is this, like the pursuit of freedom, which is actually something you and I are kind of talking about behind the scenes a bit for a class we're working on about happiness, the pursuit of happiness. Kind of the same thing. Like as long as we are pursuing freedom, we're not actually free. As long as we are in the pursuit of, we're recognizing freedom is off in the distance and we're trying to go get it. And I do think in a lot of ways there is kind of that message about freedom, like out in the world, like, oh, freedom is this thing you experience when, or freedom is this like prescribed. It's another checklist.
When your student loans are paid.
Yeah,
You're
right.
free.
Oh, never. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, there is that for me at least, that is a very specific like type of freedom, like
Yeah.
this prescribed freedom of like what it should look like, what it should be, how you should get there, what's going to happen when. And it also has a very specific connotation for me about it that just feels kind of icky. And so I'm, just recognizing like, oh, wow, I actually have two very different versions of that word.
Yeah,
And
because then
one
there's like
is,
an embodied freedom. I think that's what we're talking about, this, like,
yeah,
intrinsic freedom when we can tap into it, I think,
yeah,
uh, instead of this kind of self-imposed sort of freedoms outside, which also expectations. Like,
yeah,
when you do this, then this happens. When you do this, then this happens. This won't happen until this happens. Yeah.
right. And I'm noticing even as we're talking about it, depending on who says it and the context they say it in and the tone they use, I can either really stand behind somebody when they're talking about freedom or be like, ugh, that feels gross. And that like
That's
that
true of a
very
lot of things.
yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like spiritual freedom? I don't know, that sounds super woo woo, but like the freedom to be who we actually are.
I think
That
it's
has
authenticity.
yeah, that
It goes back to authenticity. I think
yeah,
that's
it
what it
has
is.
such a different connotation and feeling to it than like freedom. Like
America.
Merc. Yeah, right. Pickup trucks and shotguns and
Yeah.
flags and or I don't know, whatever. For me this week, the idea of freedom, what comes up is in freedom to be, it's the when I guess this is back to full circle. When we give ourselves permission to be the thing that we're being called to be, freedom is the experience of actually being that thing.
Yeah.
And so the way life shifts, and again for me it was I would always find myself in a specific situation, and it usually meant being like second in line. And that felt really safe and comfortable because I didn't have to take the responsibilities of being the first in line, being the first one, being the one to say, being the one to always be responsible for, right? And so it took me having to give myself permission to take responsibility for the thing in order to actually experience the freedom that then comes along. Like I wasn't bound to that place anymore, right? I wasn't like stuck in second place or second in line or whatever, right? Like I could be the one to go out and do the thing.
Freedom for me means it's this freedom to explore myself and what that looks like, and a freedom to do that at any point in time. Freedom like that, who I am today and how I show up today, like, I have freedom to explore that a little further and maybe show up in another way tomorrow. And so it's like this, it's not encapsulated in this one little, uh, this one type of existence. It can
Yeah.
be so much more than that. And so I think freedom to be just really gives us just this more expansive room to explore what that may look like for us,
Yeah.
and how that may not only impact our individual lives, and then take it a little further, how does my freedom to be, how does that actually impact the world? How does it actually begin to impact our collective experience? And how do, when I'm doing that and when I'm embodying that in my life, how am I inviting other people to do the same?
Yeah.
Because often we're like, I want to be free to be me, but I want everybody else to play in this expectation
Right.
that I've created of them. I mean, that's the truth. And so, what would it look like for us to honor our own freedom to be, and then honor the freedom of others. I think that's what we're talking about, this movement of normalizing this sort of expression, because then it becomes like this catalyst for everything.
Yeah.
So then we're all invited to begin to explore and shift and move and play in ways that maybe we haven't done before. And like, how could that so transform our collective experience?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us in this conversation of freedom to be. I hope it has kind of spurred some stuff in you like it has for me. Like, what are some areas that not only can I give myself permission to be, but then I can begin to actualize that permission into freedom to actually be the thing, do the thing, experience the thing. And so, thank you for joining us in this conversation. There's so many things going on here at Soul Evolution Collaborative. So, if you want to jump into even deeper dive into this conversation, our Thursday night gatherings are the place to do that. This is the place where we come and share our own experiences around this topic, and then begin to learn and listen and move and breathe with each other in a way that is transformative. And so, there's webinars and events coming up. You can learn all about that at our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. We will be so excited to see you at any of these events. So if we don't see you at any of these things or Thursday, we will definitely see you back here next week for Truth Be Told 2.0.